The sun had barely risen over the dusty streets of Kermanshah, a city in Iran, but already the air was heavy with tension. 10 Christians, young and old, walked quietly together through narrow alleys, their hearts pounding like drums. Their names were Isaac, Mina, Layla, Nadir, Hadi, Samira, Ramin, Dara, Yara, and Omid. Each one carried a small Bible, their hands trembling, not from fear, but from hope. They were not ordinary people. They were ordinary people with an extraordinary courage. For weeks, the group had been preaching about Jesus in secret. Whispers of love, forgiveness, and hope flowed from their mouths, touching hearts in a place where speaking of Christ was forbidden. They knew the danger, yet their faith burned brighter than their fear. Every time they shared their message, it felt like the walls around them cracked a little, letting light seep into the dark corners of people's lives. But this morning was different. The city seemed quieter than usual, too quiet. As they stepped out of a small house, chains suddenly appeared. Strong hands grabbed them from behind, yanking them to the ground. The air filled with angry shouts, and the sound of heavy boots echoed off the walls. Soldiers and guards had found them. Isaac, the oldest among them, felt his chest tighten. "Stay calm," he whispered. His voice was steady, though his body shook. "Jesus is with us." Mina, who had never seen much fear in her life, squeezed his hand. She could feel her heart beating like it wanted to escape. The guards dragged the 10 believers into the center of the city, where a crowd had begun to gather. Rocks, sharp and heavy, lay scattered on the ground. The Christians were chained to wooden posts, their faces bruised, their clothes torn. People shouted, some in anger, some out of fear. Their eyes glistened with tears. Layla, just 14 years old, looked up at the sky. The sun felt too hot, too bright, as if it was watching every move. She whispered a small prayer. "Jesus, help us." Hadi, beside her, felt a strange calm wash over him despite the pain of the chains cutting into his wrists. Something deep inside him told him that even here, in this moment of death, they were not alone. The leader of the crowd, a man with a scarred face and eyes cold as stone, raised his hand. "For spreading lies, for speaking of a God who does not exist, you will die," he yelled. And with that, the first rock was thrown. But just as the stone flew through the air, something impossible happened. A sudden, invisible force seemed to surround the 10 Christians. The rock stopped mid-air, frozen, as if time itself had paused. Gasps filled the crowd. Another rock came, but again it halted, hovering in place before gently falling to the ground. The believers looked at each other in disbelief, their hearts pounding, not with fear, but with wonder. Omid, the youngest of the group, felt warmth in his chest, a quiet whisper in his mind saying, "I am here. I am with you." Tears streamed down his face, and a joy unlike anything he had ever known filled him. The crowd was silent now. The guards' faces twisted with confusion. Something was happening, something they could not understand. The 10 Christians, bound in chains and facing death, suddenly felt stronger than ever. Their faith, which had carried them through secret meetings and whispered prayers, was shining like a light the world could not dim. And in that moment, no one could deny it, a miracle had begun. The air in the square felt electric. The stunned silence of the crowd was like a heavy blanket pressing down on everyone. Stones that were meant to harm the 10 Christians now lay scattered harmlessly on the ground. Chains that bound their wrists rattled gently, but they did not break free. It was as if an invisible hand held them safely in place. Isaac lifted his head and spoke softly, his voice carrying a calm authority. "Do not fear," he said. "Jesus is protecting us. He is stronger than any man." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some were terrified, others angry. But curiosity flickered in their eyes. Mina, whose face was streaked with dust and tears, whispered a prayer. "Lord, show your power, so they may know the truth." Then, something incredible happened. A warm wind swept through the square, strong enough to make dust swirl around the people's feet. The guards, who had moments ago been shouting and moving forward, suddenly stumbled as if something unseen held them back. Nadir, who had been trembling with fear, felt a strange strength surge through his body. He straightened his back, his eyes shining with courage. The leader of the crowd, the man with the scarred face, barked orders, trying to regain control. "Move." Do not let them escape. But no matter how hard the guards tried, they could not touch the Christians. The chains seemed to float slightly above their skin, the ropes holding them tight without pain, yet completely unbreakable by human hands. Samira, her voice barely audible over the murmurs, said, "Look, the stones, they cannot touch us." Everyone looked down. Even rocks thrown from close range stopped mid-air and fell harmlessly beside them. Children in the crowd gasped, mothers clutched their babies, and some men fell to their knees. The impossible was happening right before their eyes. Ramin felt his heart fill with an unshakable peace. "It is him," he whispered to Dara. "Jesus is here." Even the youngest, little Omid, felt a strange warmth in his chest, a glow that chased away every trace of fear. He smiled for the first time that day, even as chains cut into his wrists. The crowd began to murmur. What is happening?" Someone asked. "How can they stand unharmed?" Yara, eyes wide, looked at the leader. "Look around you," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "This is no magic of man. This is the power of God. He protects those who believe." The scarred leader's face turned pale. Fear crept into his eyes. He raised a fist, trying to rally his guards, but it was no use. The stones that had once been weapons now seemed heavy as lead, refusing to fly, as if the wind itself would not let them harm the faithful. The Christians remained calm, their faces glowing not with pride, but with a serene joy that puzzled and frightened everyone watching. Then, in a moment that stunned even the believers themselves, the chains around their wrists loosened slightly. They did not fall off completely, but the pressure eased, and the believers could move their hands for the first time. A quiet laughter, full of relief and wonder, escaped Layla's lips. "He is really here," she whispered. Isaac looked at the crowd, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "You have seen what cannot be explained. This is not the work of men. This is Jesus, alive and powerful, protecting those who trust in him. Turn from fear and see his love." The murmur in the crowd turned to shouting, some in fear, some in anger, some in awe. People began stepping back, unsure what to do. Some even fell to their knees, heads bowed. It was the start of a shift, a crack in the walls of hatred and doubt that had filled the city for so long. But the miracle was far from over. What had begun as protection now hinted at something even greater. The crowd could feel it, a force beyond understanding, a presence that filled the air, soft yet undeniable. And for the 10 Christians, hope had become a living thing, stronger than chains, stronger than stones, stronger than fear. They were about to witness a miracle that no one could explain, and no one would ever forget. The city square seemed to hold its breath. The warm wind that had lifted the dust now swirled around the 10 Christians, forming a gentle halo of light that no one could explain. Every eye in the crowd was fixed on them. Even the guards, who had moments ago been brimming with rage, now froze in uncertainty. Isaac, standing tall despite the cuts and bruises on his arms from the chains, raised his voice. "Do not be afraid. Jesus is with us. He loves you, too. Open your hearts, and you will see his power." Some of the crowd gasped. Others whispered among themselves. Mothers clutched their children, unsure whether to run or stay. A few young men stepped closer, drawn by curiosity they could not suppress. Their eyes were wide, and even their faces betrayed a flicker of hope. Suddenly, a stone flew from the back of the crowd, a sharp rock thrown with full force. But instead of hitting its target, it froze in the air, quivering as if caught in invisible hands. Then, gently, it floated down and landed at the foot of Omid. He picked it up, feeling its cold surface, and smiled at the impossible. "See," he said softly, "he protects us. He protects everyone who believes." The guards whispered to each other, panic creeping into their voices. What is happening?" One muttered, This is impossible." Hattie, whose wrists were still bound but now moved more freely, looked at the leader with steady eyes. "Your chains cannot harm us because God is stronger than men. You can try, but you will never break the power of his love." The leader's face grew red, then pale, then twisted with fear. His men were shaking, refusing to raise their arms. Even when he shouted, the words seemed to vanish in the strange wind that had settled around the Christians like an invisible shield. Layla, the youngest of the group, felt a warmth spread through her body, a calm that chased away all fear. Do not be afraid, she whispered to herself. He is here. He is with us. Her words were almost inaudible, but in them, the others found courage. Suddenly, the air shimmered around them. It was like heat waves on a summer road, but this shimmer carried a feeling of love so powerful that some in the crowd began to weep. Yara's eyes widened as she saw something incredible. The chains around their wrists, which had dug painfully into their skin, now glowed faintly, shining with a golden light. The metal was still there, still binding them physically, but it no longer hurt. It was as if the chains themselves had been transformed by a force far beyond human understanding. The crowd's fear began to shift into awe. People who had come to witness punishment now watched with eyes full of wonder. Some fell to their knees, trembling. Others whispered to themselves, I have never seen anything like this. Then, without warning, the ground beneath the Christians seemed to tremble. A soft rumble rose from the cobblestones, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The 10 believers lifted their heads, feeling not fear, but a connection to something vast and eternal. Omid whispered, It is him, he is here with us. Suddenly, one of the guards, a young man with a nervous face, dropped his rock. He fell to his knees before the Christians, tears streaming down his face. I don't understand, but I believe, he stammered. Others, seeing his courage, began to do the same. One by one, guards who had been instruments of fear now hesitated, their hearts trembling with a fear they had never known, a fear mixed with awe, a realization that they were witnessing a power far greater than anything they had imagined. Samira, her hair falling into her eyes, looked around at her friends. We are alive, she said softly, because he loves us. And because of this, others may see him too. Her voice, though quiet, carried across the square, and some in the crowd began murmuring prayers of their own. The leader of the guards was furious, but he could not act. His hands shook, his face pale. Every order he shouted seemed to be swallowed by the wind, ignored by the very stones that had once been weapons. And the Christians, though battered and chained, stood unafraid, radiating a peace that no human could create. The miracle was growing, spreading through the hearts of everyone watching. People who had come to witness death were now witnesses to life. They saw not just survival, but the unmistakable presence of God protecting his people in a way that left no doubt. He was real, he was powerful, and his love could not be broken. And in that moment, the square of Kermanshah became more than a place of danger. It became a place of wonder, a place where faith shone brighter than fear, and where even the hardest hearts began to tremble before the impossible. The city square had transformed. What was meant to be a place of punishment now felt like a sanctuary. Dust swirled in golden sunlight, carried by a warm wind that seemed alive. The 10 Christians, though battered and chained, stood together, their eyes shining with a calm that no human could explain. Isaac looked around at his friends, Mina, Layla, Nadir, Hadi, Samira, Ramin, Dara, Yara, and little Omid. Each of them was trembling, yes, but with awe and joy, not fear. They had survived something impossible. They had survived because of Jesus. The crowd, once full of anger and anticipation of death, was now silent. Mothers held their children close, men whispered prayers they hadn't dared to speak before, and young people knelt in wonder. Even the guards who had chained them were frozen, unsure what to do. Then the leader of the guards, the scarred man who had ordered the stoning, stepped forward. His face was pale, his hands shaking. How are you still alive? He asked, his voice trembling. Layla, her small hands still bound, looked at him. We are alive because Jesus loves us, she said softly, her voice carrying across the square. He is stronger than fear, stronger than hate, stronger than chains. The scarred man laughed nervously. No, this isn't possible. Men like you, men like us, we control everything. But as he spoke, a wind blew through the square, lifting dust into the sunlight like golden sparks. It swirled around him, gentle yet commanding. He felt it push him back, as if invisible hands were warning him. Suddenly, the chains on all 10 Christians glowed brighter than before. They lifted slightly, no longer pressing painfully into their wrists, and shined like molten gold. The crowd gasped. Nadir whispered, It's him, he is showing his power. Then came the most impossible part. The rocks that had been thrown, or were about to be thrown, hovered in midair, spinning slowly, frozen by some unseen force. They shimmered like tiny stars. The leader's jaw dropped. What is this?" he whispered. Hadi raised his voice, steady and clear. "This is the God we serve. He protects the faithful. He does not abandon those who trust in him." One by one, the guards began to kneel. Their weapons clattered to the ground. Some were weeping, others trembling so much they could barely stand. Even the scarred leader, though still stubborn, felt a crack in his heart, a fear he had never known before. The power in the air was not just physical, it reached deep into their hearts, into the very soul. Meanwhile, little Omid, his eyes wide with wonder, raised his small hands toward the hovering stones. "He is real," he whispered. "He is really real." The others smiled at him, tears streaking their dusty faces. "Yes, Omid," said Samira. "He is with us, and he is with everyone who believes." The crowd began to change. Whispers of hope spread like wildfire. People who had come to watch punishment now began to pray aloud. Children ran forward, staring at the Christians with awe. Even hardened men, who had carried the stones and ropes, began to drop them, falling to their knees in surrender to a power they could not understand. Then came the moment no one expected. The chains, which had once bound them so tightly, fell completely away, yet no one had touched them. The 10 believers stepped forward freely, their movements graceful and strong, like people reborn. The sunlight seemed to follow them, wrapping them in warmth and light. Isaac looked at the crowd, his voice rising so all could hear. "Look around you. This is not the work of men. This is Jesus. He is alive, he protects those who believe, and his power is stronger than hate, stronger than fear, stronger than death itself." A hush fell over the square. Every eye was on them. Every heart was pounding with a mixture of awe, fear, and hope. Some wept openly, others fell to their knees, shaking. A few, hardened and stubborn, turned away, but even they could feel the invisible force pressing on their hearts, impossible to ignore. Layla stepped forward, tiny but fearless. "We prayed for you," she said. "We prayed that you would see the truth. Jesus loves everyone, even those who try to harm us." Her voice rang like a bell, pure and clear. Then, as if the day itself had been waiting for this moment, the warm wind swirled once more. The hovering stones gently fell to the ground, harmless. The light around the 10 Christians glowed brighter for a heartbeat, then faded softly, leaving a lingering warmth that no one could forget. The miracle had reached its peak. The believers were free, the crowd was changed, and everyone, guards, onlookers, children, mothers, hardened men, knew they had witnessed something beyond explanation. Isaac looked at his friends, smiling through tears. "Today, you saw the impossible," he said. "Tomorrow, you will tell the world. Jesus is alive, and his love is stronger than anything." And as the crowd slowly dispersed, the city of Kermanshah would never be the same again. Hearts had been touched, lives had been changed, and the power of faith had been made visible for all to see. The city of Kermanshah had quieted, but the energy of the miracle lingered like a heartbeat that could not be silenced. The streets were no longer just dusty pathways, they were sacred in a way no one could explain. The 10 Christians, Isaac, Mina, Layla, Nadir, Hadi, Samira, Ramin, Dara, Yara, and little Omid, walked together through the city, their bodies tired but their spirits soaring. News of what had happened spread like wildfire. People whispered of the stones that stopped midair, the chains that no longer hurt, and the glowing light that had surrounded the believers. Those who had once shouted for their deaths were now questioning everything they thought they knew. Even the guards, who had been instruments of fear, were shaken to their very core. Isaac, his voice calm but full of strength, gathered the group in a quiet alley. "We must continue," he said. "What we witnessed is not just for us. It is for everyone. Jesus showed his power to save, to protect, and to love. Now it is our duty to share his truth." Mina nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I never thought I could feel so alive," she said. "Even facing death, I felt his love surround me. Now, everyone must know that love." The scarred leader of the guards, once so sure of his authority, had fallen to his knees in the square. He did not speak at first, only trembling. But eventually, he whispered to himself, I saw it. I cannot deny it. There is a power greater. than men, greater than hate, greater than fear. Little Omid, holding Layla's hand, looked up at the leader with wide eyes. You can believe too, he said softly. Jesus loves you, too. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a truth that could not be ignored. Over the next days, the city changed. People who had once been hardened by fear now spoke in whispers of hope. Families gathered in secret, reading the words the 10 Christians carried with them. Children learned about love that never fails, and even those who had once sought to harm others began to question their own hearts. The 10 believers continued their mission, but now they walked without fear. Each step they took was guided by a sense of purpose stronger than anything they had ever felt. They visited homes, spoke to crowds, and shared the story of what had happened in the square. The miracle had become more than a memory, it had become a living message. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in gold and crimson, Isaac gathered everyone in a small courtyard. Remember this day, he said, not because of fear or danger, but because of the love that saved us. Jesus is alive, he protects, he heals, and he transforms hearts. Never forget that. Mina, looking around at her friends, added, we were 10, but now the world can be many. Anyone who opens their heart can feel his love, and even the smallest among us, like Omid, can be part of the miracle. Omid, smiling through tears, raised his hands. I saw it, I felt it, and I will never forget. The city of Kermanshah was never the same. Stories of the miracle traveled far beyond its dusty streets. People whispered of 10 Christians who faced death and lived, of stones that could not harm, and chains that no longer bound. Hearts were changed, courage was born, and faith spread quietly but powerfully through every corner of the city. And even those who had once sought to destroy the believers could not shake the truth they had seen. They carried the memory of the miracle in their hearts, a reminder that no human force could overpower the love of God. Isaac looked at the city skyline as night fell, the stars twinkling like tiny beacons of hope. We were protected, he said softly. We were chosen to witness this. And now, we must share it, because miracles are not meant to be hidden. They are meant to change lives. And so the 10 Christians walked into the night, their hearts full, their mission clear. The miracle that had saved them from death became a spark that ignited hope, courage, and faith in thousands of hearts. The story of Kermanshah would never be forgotten. A story of love stronger than fear, of faith stronger than chains, and of a God whose power could not be contained by men, stones, or hate. The impossible had happened, and the world would remember. Summary. In the city of Kermanshah, Iran, 10 Christians, Isaac, Mina, Layla, Nadir, Hadi, Samira, Ramin, Dara, Yara, and little Omid, were captured and chained, facing stoning for preaching the gospel. But in the face of death, a miraculous power protected them. Stones froze midair, chains became harmless, and an invisible force shielded them. Witnesses, including guards and townspeople, were stunned and transformed by what they saw. The miracle not only saved their lives but inspired courage, faith, and hope in countless hearts, proving that God's love and power are stronger than fear, hate, or death. Moral lesson. True faith can overcome even the greatest dangers. God's love protects and transforms lives, and miracles can inspire hope, courage, and belief in others. Standing firm in faith, even in the face of fear, allows the light of God's power to shine in the darkest places. The end.